All right, welcome again, ladies and gentlemen. So this is our first panel to kick off the conference. It's the idea of buying influence. Yes, influence is bought. Our creators of new political media. I think we're going to sort of land the plane on where we stand with that. So I have the pleasure of being joined by Taylor, Alex, and Daniela. Elizabeth is going to be a late entrance to kind of pop on the stage, so don't act like you see her when she runs up, but we're going to weave her in seamlessly. But listen, it's an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you all for joining us. In the interest of time, because we got a lot to get through and unpack, we're going to save a lot of the particulars and sort of the longer introductions. But if each one of you, starting with the ladies, just introduce who you are, where you're from, and then we're going to jump in white hot to the narrative. Let's go. So, Taylor?
I'll start. I'm Taylor Black. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at the NRCC, overseeing the committee's digital, telemarketing, and direct mail efforts. Where I'm from, I'm originally from Orange County, California.
Hey everyone, I'm Daniela Hernandez Guerrero. I ran as a deputy director our digital partnerships for Harris for President for the Harris campaign. Prior to that, the Biden campaign, and really brought creators and podcasters into the fold alongside the rest of the team based out of New York.
I'm Alex Bruesewitz. I'm from Ripon, Wisconsin, which is also the birthplace of the Republican Party. Fun fact. But I had the awesome pleasure of helping President Trump with his podcast strategy and his influencer strategy as an advisor for the campaign. I've owned my own firm called X Strategies, which is a social media marketing firm focused on conservatives for the past going on 9 years now.
All right. Thank you. So when we kind of went through the prep call, we really sort of kicked this off talking about where the creator spaces come from. I come from the era, I'm old enough to say it, the blogosphere. My first instance in working with creators were bloggers, and it was actually around the war in Iraq. So you guys can do the math on how long ago that was. And then we get to this notion of the rise of the influencer class, and now they're creators because they create stuff. And now we've gotten to a place, and then the blogosphere was about unshackling editorial from major media institutions to individual people with, very distinct talk tracks. Now we see the creator space has emerged of that. And Taylor, I'm going to kind of kick this off with you. One of the things you talked about was this idea of creators as press. And I think that was the early part of the blogosphere, didn't get a whole lot of respect, didn't probably have the level of scale. And I think the inside the Beltway institutions fought that. But now we're in an era where that is very much normalized. So I'd love for you to talk to the audience about this idea as creators being press, part of the press, representative of the press, against the press, whatever sort of narrative you think comes to mind when you think of the kind of work you've had to do.
Yeah, so when we look at it, I look at it from kind of a performance marketing standpoint. So what I do at the committee is very much a rapid response marketing entity. And the way that we look at creators as press is if creators are talking about it, they're probably talking about it before it hits Fox News. So when we are marketing to our grassroots donors, that's the majority of your 65 plus moms and dads who are watching Fox News every day. But we use creators as that kind of launch point for news and things that we think are going to definitely hit the mainstream eventually. But they are going to be first and foremost the first source of where we get that. I think Pew Research just put out that study that 1 in 5 Americans get their news from social media or creators. So that's where we kind of start. We also look at it as a holistic of not every Republican voter or every Republican donor knows every single influencer, but they follow enough. And if there are enough creators talking about the same thing and it eventually moves into the mainstream, that's something that kicks off. So we did this a lot with marketing around campus protests during the war in Gaza. And this was something that was really big online. And we had a lot of creators talking about it and what was actually going on. I mean, I'll pick on specifically because I went to USC, but it was a lot at UCLA's campus. And there were creators down on the ground, YouTubers who were reporting from UCLA's campus. So we realized that this was a hot button topic, and we took that and ran with it. And that's how we were able to kind of take that back to our online donors and talk to them about an issue that started really as like a creator driven topic. But I would say that's how we have looked at it from a committee standpoint is these creators are usually first to these topics, and they come with a very obvious view of how these things are going to go. And that tells us a lot about where the electorate is going. So that's how we kind of take a look at it.
No, I love that. I'm going to come back to you later about the point of discovery of finding these people. But, Danielle, I know back in your YouTube days, we know how YouTube was viewed by the major media populace. Let's just call it that. Between YouTube and YouTubers. Now, if you're Gen Alpha, it's the number one career you want to be. You want to be a YouTuber before you want to be an NFL player.
That's right.
We've come a long way. So talk to us about the evolution of trust, because the biggest thing in politics is this idea of the culture of trust, and how YouTube has come full and YouTubers come full circle with being entities of trust. Because I couldn't imagine Taylor embarking on some of the things she talked about if there wasn't belief in the trust establishment. So maybe you can give some perspective for the audience how you've watched that evolve from those days to what you've done recently on the Harris campaign.
Yeah, definitely. So for context, I was prior to the campaign, I was at YouTube doing creator partnerships for about a decade, or about 6 years, 7 years. And yeah, I think like watching the evolution of the creator economy, we witnessed an election cycle where creators were at the forefront. They were the first source people got their news from, their opinions from, and really kind of helped develop that pipeline. But creators have been around for the way that we define them today about a decade and a half, and have really only seen that come to the forefront in the last 4 or 5 years. It's really since the pandemic, I think, is when it became something that brands paid attention to, that politics paid attention to. We saw a little bit of it in 2020, but seeing the exponential growth from campaign to campaign was really, honestly, a bit surprising. But, creators adapt from the OG YouTube days. That was the long form videos. That was the original formats that we know today, whether that's a like get ready with me or a what's in my bag video. And that's really evolved in a way that's incredibly sophisticated. Creators are running full-blown businesses with teams of 5, teams of 20, teams of 50, and have adapted through, all different sorts of algorithm changes, format changes, have gone from long form to, make sure you're catching attention in the first 5 seconds to you've got 60 seconds in short form, all the way up to now having 10 minutes or so on platforms like TikTok. So have rolled through with all of those changes and really been able to adapt to those. But I think the one thread that connects all of it is that they've always had a trusted connection with their audiences. And I think it's often chalked up to the format in which they're doing it, in a kind of walls down conversation where it's just person to person. Here's me offering my opinion. Here's how I found out about this news. Here are my sources, and kind of inviting the viewer into the room with them. So I think that's really kind of helped develop and sustain the creator economy over the last decade and a half. And it's been really exciting to see kind of some of these industries kind of take them into the fold. And certainly the approach that the Harris campaign took was giving them access and inviting them into the room in as many spaces as we could, whether it was the convention or, inviting them to the spin room and debate rooms. So really kind of taking that connection that they had built with their audiences and opening those spaces for them to be able to leverage was definitely a key success metric for the campaign.
I like that. It's great to hear that. I think one of the things that you gave that kind of ties to it, Alex, is you talked about, particularly from the Trump side, not overlooking the randomness of an account, a user that seemed to be meaningless. We're in an area of scale. Is there reach? How many followers? It's all about media math. It is still TV is the waterfall model, but in the creator space and influencer space and social space, it's almost an inverse model. So one of the things I'd like you to talk to the audience about is the fact that these seemingly nascent accounts became impactful and they could be mobilized. Because I think what people don't look at is they weren't looking at nano micro influencers and the like and bringing them into the conversation and figuring out how to leverage them. If they didn't have the appearance of being a major entity, they didn't get any credit.
Right. And I just like to apologize if I'm a little sleepy this morning. This is my first time on stage with a microphone since I fell off stage during a speech in New York City just a couple of weeks ago. So still trying to get back into the flow of things. But just real quick, I want to touch on the importance of trust if I can. And I know the panel's titled Buying Influence. I think the trust, leaves when an opinion of a creator, if there's a price tag on the opinion of a creator or an opinion of a celebrity. And so when it comes public that, that trust or that support of a candidate or support of an issue is not organic and it's done through a financial relationship, the trust leaves. I think the creators are going to have a hard time rebuilding that trust with their audience because they don't know what's paid for and what's not. And so I think from our perspective, we tried to inspire influence. We tried to have a message and a candidate, which we were lucky enough to have, that made people want to be involved in a unique way, whether it's door knocking, or our new version of door knocking is starting a Twitter account and being or an X account and being an X keyboard warrior for us. That's a form of door knocking, and you can amass a following. And to your point about the randomness of the accounts, I mean, we have accounts that, are anonymous accounts, but they're a police officer in a random community across our country, and they have 1.5 million Twitter followers, and they post under an anonymous name, and they're some of the best content, some of the best takes, and we amplify them, we promote them. We don't look for just a particular type of person to promote. We just recognize talent, we recognize ideas, and we try to amplify them. And we, to her credit, I think Daniela and Kamala's team did do a good job of recognizing the importance of the creator. I was not in any of the conversations on her team, so I don't know what was paid and what wasn't. But when you had influencers like a guy named Harry Sisson, who gets picked on a lot online, he might be a nice guy, but Harry had a tough job for 4 years. He had to tweet things like the economy is fantastic, while the consumer goes to the grocery store and they had just paid $12 for some eggs. So like Harry is either not that bright, or he was being paid to promote lies, which I think hurts him with credibility and trust with his audience.
Yeah. Now, I appreciate the perspective. And first of all, let's give a warm welcome to Elizabeth. She's now joined the panel. So we're going to put her on the hot seat very, very quickly. So when we start talking about the idea of leveraging influencers, creators outside of institutions, as a researcher, the researcher in you, there's the notion of how we are threading the line of trust with institutions, with guardrails, corporate governance, policy. People could lose their job between people who have asserted themselves as authority figure with some level of depth of knowledge around a subject matter as a subject matter expert. What that starts to mean in terms of the trust shifting. We've gone from this notion of powerful countries to powerful companies to now powerful people. That's the world we're in. That's why everybody wants to be a YouTuber now. So I'd love for you to give the researcher in you that sort of perspective, and what that means as we start to structure different alliances in this particular discipline for the years going out ahead of us.
Yeah, it brings in an entirely different group of people and new perspectives when you have that kind of a shift. You also have to tread lightly, when you were just talking about people who have some depth of knowledge about the things they're talking about and all of that. And I know Alex here talked about anonymous accounts and things like that, and like amplifying like talking points. I am very public and always have been. My entire full name, look up everything about me, because a big part of my platform is also that I am a subject matter expert in certain things as a lawyer, as a social scientist, with what I do. And I need people to be able to say, okay, it's not just somebody saying that on the internet, because believe me, I've come across a lot of people online who say they know this, that, or the third, and they're under like a fake name, and they say, oh, it's for my protection and my safety, when really it turns out they're lying about their credentials and who they are, and it can really erode a lot of trust. And so I made the decision very early on to be very public, even if there was some risk or threats or whatever, because I wanted people to be able to Google me and say, oh, she published this, she worked on this, she did that, and she is who she says she is. And so I think that's a level of responsibility that we have to really think about when you talk about shifting from powerful institutions to powerful people, because we see that individuals can really shift someone's perspective. They can really, my specialty as a scientist is in social science, and specifically behavior change with public health campaigns. And I think about politics in terms of behavior change. And that is a big deal when you have that kind of authority and that kind of influence to cause a behavior change in someone. So the sad thing is we don't have any kind of single way of governing this. There's like no governing body that says we're going to make sure that creators and folks online adhere to certain ethical standards. and it just becomes another kind of a minefield almost that we have to navigate.
Absolutely.
I just think that is, something that the Democrats have tried to do over the years, trying to have like governance over who can have opinions online. And that's why, they cracked down in 2020 on censorship. And, it's just, if you have a good opinion, people are going to come to your opinion, and they're going to support it or not. I think that there doesn't need to be a set of rules of governance to decide who can have a platform or a voice online. And I also don't think that people are scrolling online. Maybe some, but I don't think most are scrolling online trying to really dig deep into the credentials of the people who they're coming across. I don't think that I just don't think there needs to be governance or a set of regulations based on who can have a voice online.
And I will add that I'm talking about, sorry, I don't know if you're coming from a different perspective, but I'm talking about my posts that I do on private social media platforms. It's not a government-funded thing. And as we've seen with the way that Mark Zuckerberg and with X and all of these platforms have responded lately to the election, they're obviously more right-leaning. So my perspective might be a little bit different in that I've dealt with a lot of like suppression and things like that on platforms, and I do deal with people wanting to dig into my credentials and things like that, because at the end of the day, the majority of these platforms do have more right-leaning private actors who are running a lot of these things. So I might have a different experience there.
No, good. I look, totally respect both of the opinions. I want to get into one of the things Taylor talked about, because one of the things you stated was this fatigue in hearing from the elites. And I think a lot of it is about hearing from unheard voices, whether those voices are multicultural voices, lower income voices, rural America voices. The idea of this fatigue of hearing from elites, which are people who sit at the top of the power structure and dominance hierarchy. Because a lot of this is just about dominance hierarchies rolling and folding, and power shifting to places that people just feel like are less deserving or should have it. So I'd love for you to kind of give some more context to that, and what are the shifts you all made and how that started to turn and open up a different playbook for you all.
Yeah, so the way that we looked at it is when we are trying to reach voters and donors specifically online, we don't necessarily want to partner with those large entities. I know it is popular now for news organizations to turn their reporters into influencers. Whether or not you think that's the right thing to do is its own opinion. But what we have really tried to do is foster relationships with these creators that are not inherently political, but by the nature of their content are right-leaning, tend to be conservative. So we're talking about influencers who are mom influencers. They predominantly do parenting content, but they care about the future of their kids and safety, and they want a great future for their children. They care about the kind of food and the ingredients in the food that they're eating. They care about what they're learning in schools. I think that for us is way more effective than going to these elite news sources, but partnering with those creators who aren't inherently political, but because we live in a political world and the last year has been political, they have opinions. And I think those people are frankly way more effective than the news podcasters or the news influencers who solely focus on news and political content. They're great. We follow a lot of them. I love them. I get news from them. But I do think the folks that aren't focused on that, there are a lot of, honestly, the space of fitness. Like fitness is one of those markets of online influencers that lean right, and they have a lot of right-leaning views. And I think that those influencers can sometimes be a lot more impactful than the actual news ones.
Interesting. So I know one of the things for you, Daniela, is really expanding the frame with podcasters, because podcasters weren't about talking about what was most monetizable. And I think that most of these media institutions, they tend to create what is easiest to sell back to an advertiser. Let's just be clear. So that's the structure. But podcasters come up with themes, topics that are personal to them, and then created a voice. In particular, something we'll tap into that you made a comment on. So let's talk about how, from your perspectives, podcasters gave more range. Let's say when the average radio network just talks about what they've always sort of talked about, how it dimensionalized voices on a spectrum, the way that you couldn't buy enough radio stations to get the same dimensions.
Sure, and I would expand that from just podcasters to creators more generally. I think like creators will always kind of keep an eye towards what what content has been most engaging for their audiences, and continue to optimize for that. That's their entire business models, right? And I think for a lot of the creators that we kind of invited into our tent, our main goal was to make sure that they had the tools and resources to engage in the ways that they wanted to. So whether that was, similarly in whether it was lifestyle, fitness, mommy bloggers, whatever that looked like, giving them the tools and resources to talk about the policies that mattered most to them was equally as important as us engaging somebody like a Harry Sisson or a Chris Mowry, and making sure that they felt equipped and had the access that they needed. But I think like it will always be a question of like, how do you meet a creator in a way that feels engaging for their audience? How do you help them develop that story in a way that feels authentic, resonant, doesn't feel, certainly I think to your point earlier of buying influence, we were very careful to make sure that we weren't paying for content with creators. And that's something that we were really proud to make sure that we weren't buying an opinion. We weren't making sure that, or we weren't approaching it in a way that creators were being paid for that content. So that was something that we were really careful and proud of. But ultimately, creators will craft the content that feels most resonant for their audiences. And our job was to just make sure that they had the facts, the resources, the people that they wanted to talk to in order to be able to do that.
I love that. I mean, one of the things, Alex, you talked about was tapping into this notion of discourse as part of the strategy, that it allowed you to not have to worry about paying when there were people who were just irritated or passionate about a side or view of the issue that were natural voices that you could open the floodgates to. I mean, look, let's just be clear. Uber could be the discourse if you don't like taxis. Okay. Yelp is the discourse if you didn't like the food or the waiter. So discourse is not new as a model. A lot of businesses and industries have been built on the notion of dissatisfaction or against the establishment, and they've been billion-dollar businesses. So let's just say it's that. But talk about the discovery of that and what that meant as fuel for that side of the aisle.
Well, something that I had a unique pleasure of having was the ability to connect with President Trump one-on-one, get to know him as a human being, as a man, have dinner with him. He's one of the funniest guys, most charismatic people you'll ever meet in person. But that was the side of him that the media never showed. There'd be moments where I'd be flying on his plane and, MSNBC or CNN had like this fear-mongering portrayal of him on some news segment saying he's a threat to XYZ. And then he and I are cracking up about memes on the plane. Like, it was so detached and disconnected from reality. And so what we found was that podcasting with unique partners, not partners that were 100% friendly to us. A lot of the creators that we partnered with, whether it was Theo Vaughn or Andrew Scholes, these are people who are critical of President Trump in on one episode, curious towards him on another. And so, we weren't just 100% set on having discourse and discussions with people who are 100% friendly to us. And I think we were able to expand our reach and our message to new audiences, where I think the Democrats played it a little safe. I don't think Kamala really did a challenging interview with one of these creators. But what we allowed President Trump to do in those podcast formats was basically bring the Donald Trump that we see at a dinner, that fun, charming Trump, put him in front of millions and millions of eyeballs every time we did that podcast. And so I think we had a unique advantage with that because we had such a unique candidate. Not every candidate should be doing podcasts. Sometimes you hear from a candidate and you like them less in those formats. With President Trump, you heard from him more and you liked him more. So it's not for everybody, but it was definitely for him.
Interesting. So let me get into this, because when discourse is part of the way in, it's easier to discover because you can find the voices that are resounding, that have a louder narrative and tap into them. But for Taylor and Daniela, when you're looking at identifying these people, did you have to use certain tools in part of the discovery? Were you using a Meltwater Social, a Brand Watch, or were you just really tapping into communities, seeing who creators sitting on the other side of that conversation, and then reaching out? I think the room, wants to know, because this is very much a relationship business, in particular inside the Beltway. But with mechanisms to get there quicker? Are there some things that you deployed to actually discover, find them, activate them? Or was it still done the same way it's always been done in terms of who knows who and is connected to who?
Yeah, so I think there's a number of ways to approach it. I mean, coming from a committee based in DC, it's a little harder. We're really lucky that we have an entire, we're at 220 members right now who are essentially their own creators and influencers. All of these members have their own audiences, they have their own following, they have their own districts. We have a nationwide network of members who want to talk to their audiences. So that's how we've always kind of looked at it, is like we have this specially built-in network that we already work with. I mean, there's great firms that do this that I know a lot of organizations work with. And frankly, I have a great team that's like full of dudes who like look at X all day long. And there's sometimes that's your best source, is people who consume the content. And I think that's also why it's really important to have people on your team who consume the content like everyone else. It's great to have a million consultants who do this, that, and the other, but sometimes the 22-year-old kid who just graduated, who's like the president of his college Republicans chapter in Wisconsin or like Nevada, all of these places that we're playing in, sometimes those are your best sources of what's going on. And you ask them, who are you listening to? Who's cool? I didn't know I didn't listen to Theo Vaughn until my entire team was like, you have to be listening to this person. This is cool. And that was years ago. And so I think that there's multiple ways to get in there. And sometimes it's just at the staff level, but that's how we've always kind of looked at it. But I would really lean on being in a committee. It's really nice. You have members who are very prominent. They have their own following. It is a built-in network. So I would defer to people of wherever you are, whatever campaign you're in, you probably already have a built-in network. You just have to look around you.
Yeah, I think it was similar. It was similar for us and for the campaign. I think a key change or a key moment where we just saw an overwhelming amount of support and excitement was with the candidate switch in those first initial 2 or 3 weeks, where folks that we had like broached conversations with or had initial kind of exploratory conversations with returned to the table in a way that was like, how can we put this into motion immediately? So I think we really did our best to capitalize on all of that excitement. And then I think as we rolled into August, we kind of continued to see that develop. So it was really kind of taking advantage of the inbound as well. But other than that, we really looked at who were the key folks that we're trying to talk to and speak to, and who are the folks that they're listening to. So similarly with Theo Vaughn or other folks that we were trying to talk to, we took that similar approach of just like, who is the key constituency groups that we want to serve, and who are the folks that they trust and they listen to.
Outstanding. Well, thank you. So we're going to move to QA because time is upon us. I do have one question myself, but I know Steve will open it up and see who else has a burning question.
And in media post fashion, for those of you who have a question, please wave your hand frantically so I can see you because I'm half blind. And please stand. Let us know who you are and who you're with.
Yeah. This is Pete with Paramount. I'm curious to know, because there's a lot of platforms out there, I guess the red and the blue, which ones were the ones that were bringing the most engagement? TikTok, IG Reels, YouTube Shorts. Like if you are going to be out there as a brand marketer on Madison Avenue, what cues can we take from DC?
I think Facebook, from a creator perspective, is totally dead. And I think that's why Zuck is doing what he's doing now, and we'll see if it works. We'll see. But I think Facebook itself is maybe for targeted ads, and I know that there's some targeted ad people in this room, so keep doing your thing, guys. But from a creator perspective, Facebook is totally dead. From our perspective, we crushed it on TikTok. Kamala HQ and Biden HQ kind of had a head start because they were a little on there, and then they decided all of a sudden after building their platforms that they were against TikTok, and then whatever. But when we got on TikTok, we had 0 followers, and Kamala HQ had like 3.7 million. By election day, we had over 5 million followers and surpassed Kamala HQ. So we crushed it on TikTok. The president was great in those formats. We also did short form content that didn't get as much press as our podcast content did, but we did meetups with like Logan Paul or Jake Paul and Aiden Ross, and we'd have tens of millions and some of them hundreds of millions of views on those. So TikTok was great. And obviously the lack of censorship this election played a massive role. So we'll see what happens with TikTok. I think, as of right now, they have 4 days left of survival. But maybe a miracle from God comes down and saves the platform. But I think Instagram Reels will probably be the new TikTok if it does go away. And X, I think X is where the conversation's happening, at least in this business right now.
So I'm going to ask a question before we field another one. I know for you, Elizabeth, the lawyer in you, when you start thinking about enlisting creators on these platforms, for the audience, are there certain elements of governance that needs to be or has or you guys instituted put together, meaning certain clauses in contracts? We're starting to see the talent business that was set for Hollywood actors being put to creators in terms of agreements, non-competes for a certain period of time. I guess as people look more and more to this, what are the assurances they need to put to protect themselves holistically? Just because at the end of the day, you're dealing with people who aren't as accountable to someone working at an institution where there are just bigger ramifications.
I will just say that in this new arena of contracting with content creators, there's a lot of confusion on both parts from creators and the people doing work with them, including understanding what the FTC guidelines are, what you need to be telling creators about disclosures, how to disclose, how to also build that transparency with their audience. I know oftentimes I would have sometimes different brands say, well, because of FTC guidelines, you don't have to disclose. I did it anyway, because I'm not trying to ruin the relationship with my community and my audience and them not know that, yeah, this aligns with my opinion, but also this happens to be a sponsored post that I'm making. I think it also needs to be really clear. Well, I'll also say just frustration side of things. Sometimes when I was negotiating with people and I'd say, what are your terms for exclusivity? And they'd go, what? And I'm like, I need y'all to like look up the terms, like no, so that I can actually like talk back and forth with you, and know that I'm dealing with somebody who knows what they're doing. Also going to have to the underpaying of creators too. There's a lot of if you send something to my inbox and say you're going to give me like $500 for a post, I'm going to delete your email and immediately walk away. Like really not understanding what rates they're supposed to be paying people based on their following. And not taking into account creators as whole people. So like if you come to me and you say, I want you to make something about this administrative law topic and you give me nothing else, you're also going to pay me a consultant fee because I'm an administrative law subject matter expert. Like you can't just go and say, oh, it's a creator and influencer. If you're contracting me to do something that is in like my legal field, I'm going to make you pay for that legal service on top of also me posting it on my platform. So there's also just been a lot of like engagement with creators of just assuming like, oh, influencer as an umbrella term and not looking at like, but are you talking to maybe an epidemiologist? Are you talking to an OBGYN? Are you, and I'm also a stand-up comedian. If you want me to come out to an in-person event, that's a whole different conversation from just social media. So really needing to look at the creator as the whole person and understand what you're negotiating and understand what you're paying for.
All right. Well, thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen,
I was just going to add something on that because I do find it a little bit difficult because I do think in the creator space, and I think this is something that happens more on the left, is a lot of people who are using regular firms. I think when you talk about how Hollywood does it, I think you're losing the entire component of this is political and there are laws that go on top of maybe the FTC. Is you're dealing with the FEC. The FEC has not ruled on how you advertise for creators. And I think you're going to get into like a big conundrum here where you have people who don't work in politics, who don't understand political law, who are now paying creators who also know nothing about political law. And I think that's going to get campaigns in a really tough spot. So I think that also plays into like Alex's point about when you're paying these creators and it's not coming from a relationship standpoint, you are liable to get both yourself and these creators that you are trying to work with into a lot of trouble when you're working in the paid space. So that is always my caution when we talk to our campaigns that come in who want to work with creators of like, making sure that your compliance person and your legal team is looking over everything and making sure, because again, these creators, if you're not using ones that specifically do political content, and even them, you're bound to get yourself in trouble.
And I do want to
Yeah, I
clarify
was
when
gonna
she's
say.
saying campaigns, just to be very clear, like I was never paid by a political campaign. I'm talking like when I do work for Brennan Center for Justice or Everytown when I'm talking about gun safety, right? Don't want to confuse. Sorry, I just wanted to make that clarification. By campaign, we also call those campaigns. Like this is the Everytown campaign. So we're not talking about just a partisan political candidate. You will. I actually have only met a couple of creators who did any sort of ads directly for any partisan campaign. The majority of the work that we do when we contract, it's things like that. So if you go on my social media account, you can see maybe some PACs tagged, like I work with Congressional Black Caucus PAC pretty often, but it's a lot of nonprofits who my messaging aligns with what they're trying to do.
All right, thank you.
Albert, thank you. Thank you, panel, very much.
Thank
These
you.
guys will be hanging out. We'll be